Okay, so agency. I said I was halfway done, and halfway done brought me. Totally haven't queued this up yet. Let's go all the way back to agencies, probably at the top of the CMR, Convisor Mini Review for curious people. Looking at the outline, the thing is only 33 pages. I said I was halfway done, and I think I probably got to geez, I don't know. But I know it was only 45 minutes to get this done before. So what were we talking about?
You ready then? Even with knowledge, a bank can continue for 10 days after the date of death to pay your certified check drawn prior to the date of death, unless ordered to stop payment by a person claiming an interest in the account. When agent has some present actual authority, there are situations in which the agent exceeds her authority to act on behalf of the principal, yet the principal is still bound by the agent's acts. Prior acts, when a principal has authority and with a third party acts beyond the scope of the limitation, the principal will be bound by the agreement made by the third party and agent. So I'm going to leave it there at more than halfway through this reading.
So I was talking about liability. Okay. Liability to principal and agent on page 22. Yeah, and so rather than go into the very end of that module 3, what I'm actually going to do instead is just read this chart. It defines liable on a contract, principal, agent, and third party. Starting with a principal, they are bound if valid authority existed, actual apparent, or by ratification. Agent is liable if they are bound unless the principal's existence and identity are disclosed. Also can be liable for breach of the implied warranty of authority. And a third party is liable on a contract. They will be bound to principal if valid authority existed. They'll be bound to the agent if principal was unidentified or undisclosed and the agent enforces the contract. But principal entitled to contract benefits. All right, so module 4 is the liability for principal and agent torts. And in general, a principal may be vicariously liable for the torts of their agent under 2 theories. 1, respondeat superior, and 2, apparent authority. Vicarious liability means that joint and several liability for the agent's tort will be imputed to the principal. The derivative nature of this liability means that if the agent isn't liable, the principal generally can't be held liable. However, an agent's immunity from a lawsuit does not necessarily bar recovery from the principal. Note that in addition to vicarious liability, a principal may be directly liable for their own negligence in hiring, retaining, or supervising an agent. A principal may also be directly liable for an agent's tort if they give the agent actual authority to commit the tort or ratify the tort, or in other circumstances involving independent contractors. Respondeat superior, employer-employee relationship. A principal's liability for torts committed by their agent is not determined in the same manner as determining the principal's liability for contract. A principal can be liable for the torts of an agent under the doctrine of respondeat superior. Let the master answer. Under the doctrine, an employer, formerly called a master, is liable for the torts of an employee, formerly called a servant, and committed within the scope of the employment. The principal generally is not liable for torts committed by the independent contractor. So, the first step is determining a principal's tort liability is to determine whether there is an employer-employee relationship between the tortfeasor and the principal. Independent contractor and employee. The difference between an employee and an independent contractor is that the principal employer retains the right to control the manner in which an employee performs their work. A principal does not have a right to control the manner for which work is performed by an independent contractor. In other words, if the principal has a right to tell the agent how to achieve the results the principal desires, the agent is employee. The principal does not have the right to tell the agent how to achieve the results sought, the agent probably is an independent contractor. There is a chart regarding this on page 25, and it's titled Liability of Principal for Agents Towards Under Responding at Superior. Is the inquiry at the very top, and it goes in two directions, one for employee, one for independent contractor. Begins with, is the agent an employee or an independent contractor? Look chiefly to the extent of the principal's control over the manner and method of the agent's performance. Following the employee path, was the act within the scope of employment? For example, was the employee where she was supposed to be, doing what she was supposed to be doing and the purposes that the employer had in mind? If yes, the principal is vicariously liable. If no, the principal is not liable. On the other hand, the independent contractor path asks further, was either the activity involved inherently dangerous, the duty non-delegable, or did the principal knowingly select an incompetent independent contractor? If yes, the principal is liable. If no, the principal is not liable. So inherently dangerous, I do believe, has to do with like just a department store renovating, has independent contractors working during store hours. Somebody leaves like a level protruding out into a walkway, and somebody trips over it, and they sue basically the department store that they visited. And I don't know if it's public policy that makes them responsible, or that it's that inherently dangerous, or both. But I think the MB found liability there for the Contractors Act, even though like the employees of the department store maybe weren't at fault. So, right to control factors to consider. If it is not clear whether the principal has the right to control the method and manner of the work, consider the degree of skill required on the job. Where agent skill is required, more likely to be an independent contractor. I said agent, I meant to say great. Great skill is required, more likely to be an independent contractor. Whose tools and facilities are used? If the principal supplies the tools and facilities used to perform the job, more likely to be an employee. The period of employment, definite and or short, more likely to be an independent contractor. Indefinite and or long, more likely to be an employer. The basis of compensation, if on a time basis, more likely an employee. If on a job basis, more likely a independent contractor. Business purpose, if the person is hired to perform an act in furtherance of the principal's business, more likely an employee. Non-business purpose, such as mowing the lawn, more likely independent contractor. Whether the person has a distinct business, person who has their own business or occupation is more likely to be an independent contractor. The characterization and understanding of the parties and the customs and of the locality regarding supervision of work. Scope of employment. Remember, an employer is not automatically liable for an employee's torts. The employee is liable for employee's torts only if they were committed within the scope of the employment. There are three factors helpful in making this assessment. Was the conduct of the kind the agent was hired to perform? Did the tort occur on the job, that is, within the time space limits for the employment? Was the conduct actuated at least in part to benefit the principal? Of the kind, same general nature as job. So we're going to break down those three things that we just said. Of the kind, same general nature as job. To be within the scope of employment, the employee's conduct need not be actually authorized, nor does prohibition of the principle necessarily remove the employee's conduct is similar or incidental to that which was authorized. The conduct is probably within the scope of employment. However, serious criminal acts are normally considered to be outside the scope of employment. So on the job frolic versus a detour, consider whether the employee's conduct was within the time and place of authorized employment. A detour or small show Papa. Consider whether the employee's conduct was within time and place of the authorized employment. A detour or small deviation from the employer's direction is within the scope of employment, while a frolic or major deviation requiring a substantial departure from employment is beyond the scope. Once it is shown that the employee has left the scope of employment, there must be proof of return before the employer will be held liable. Held liable for the employee's tort. The employee's relationship or ownership of the vehicle driven by the employee at the time the employee commits a tort does not automatically impose liability. Yeah. He likes being on camera. I wish I could share. What are we doing? The car, remember the car, the passengers. Motivation to serve employer. Finally, consider whether the employee's conduct was actuated, at least in part, by a purpose to serve the employer. Passengers, the employee's invitation to passengers, unless expressly authorized by the employer, is generally held to be outside the scope of the employment relationship, and the employer would not be held liable for injuries sustained by such passengers. Unauthorized instrumentalities. The employer is not liable for torts caused in the use of substantially different instrumentalities from those authorized, that is, those creating a greater risk of harm. Trips with two purposes. If the employee makes a trip with two purposes, it will be within the scope of employment if the substantial purposes of the employer is being served. Ratification. An employer may ratify the employee's torts if the normal requisites of ratification are met. In tort ratification situations, pay particular attention to the requirement that the employer material facts. Intentional torts. General rule is that an employer is not liable for the intentional torts of an employee, for example, battery or assault. Intentional torts are not normally within the scope of employment. Exceptions, torts within scope of employment. Intentional torts will be viewed as within the scope of employment if the conduct is, one, a natural incident of the employee's duties, as where force is authorized, or the nature of the work gives rise to hostilities, like a bouncer, for example, like a football player, where the employee is promoting the employer's business or is motivated to serve the employer. Third, specifically authorized or ratified by the employer. Also, a principal is liable for an agent's misrepresentations, including intentional misrepresentations, if the agent had actual, apparent, or inherent authority to make statements concerning the subject matter involved. So, liability for acts of borrowed employees. An employer may lend the services of an employee to another if the employee commits a tort on the loaned role. Who is liable? That is, who is the employer? The key issue is who has a primary right of control over the employee, the loaning principal or the borrowing principal. That employer is liable. Direct liability. Every person is liable for their own torts. Thus, an employer is liable for their own negligence if they fail to properly train or supervise employees or independent contractors, or fail to check an employees or independent contractors' criminal record or job history. Liability for acts of subservience. The doctrine of respondeat superior also applies to duly authorized subservience. Authorization to hire subservience can be expressed or implied. Implied authorization can arise from past practices, emergency situations, or a reasonable necessity to achieve an authorized result. However, the employer is generally not liable for the torts of a subservient engaged without authority. Employer-employee by estoppel. Where an employee creates the appearance of an employer-employee relationship upon which a third party relies, that principal will be stopped from denying the relationship and will be liable under the doctrine of respondeat superior. Liability for acts of independent contractors. A principal will incur liability for the acts of an independent contractor where inherently dangerous activities such as blasting are involved, or 2, non-delegable duties have been delegated, or 3, the principal knowingly selected an incompetent independent contractor. If the principal was merely negligent in selecting an independent contractor, the principal is liable only for their own negligence in selection and not the contractor's negligence. So, like, back to the example that I was giving, like, that's why I picked the wrong answer. With the whole level being left in the aisle, is because that's not blasting. So, I don't know. They might have also been trying to teach me that whole lesson of, like, the difference between vicarious liability and respondeat superior or something like that. I'm going to read the apparent authority section. If respondeat superior does not apply, the principal may still be vicariously liable in certain circumstances if the agent acted with apparent authority. Requirements. A principal is vicariously liable where an agent appears to deal or communicate on behalf of the principal, and the agent's apparent authority enables the agent to 1, commit a tort, or 2, conceal its commission. This means that for the principal to be liable, there must be a close link between the agent's tortious conduct and the agent's apparent authority. So there's a mini review in Module 5. Is the principal liable to the third party on a contract entered into by an agent? Ask yourself, did the agent have actual or apparent authority at the time of the contract, or did the principal ratify the contract later? If so, the principal is liable on the contract, but usually the agent is not. Tort liability. Is an employer liable for tort committed by an employee? Was the tort committed by an employer in the scope of employment? If so, the employer master and employee servant are jointly and severally liable to a third party. So that's actually it. Fantastic.